Okay, guys, we're to the home stretch here for the class. We're to the fun part where you get to start rendering out your hard work and see it in all its rasterized, shaded glory. So what we have is a couple different lighting setups that we're going to allow you guys to use for your final assignment. And the first one I want to show you is something called ambient occlusion. So I've went ahead and created a stage for you here, guys. It's AO stage 03, and I'm just going to open that up. And what this is basically a virtual light stage with the beveled floors here in the corner. This is exactly how a light stage looks if you went to any sort of Hollywood shoot. And I have a sphere in here, which is basically just a placeholder, so that we can kind of show you the properties for AO rendering. So let's go ahead and get started. I just created a layer here for my sphere, and I've created a camera also for you. So if I go to View, select Camera, you see here that we have a camera with the name Render Cam, and I have the resolution currently set to 720 by 405. The way you change the resolution of your camera is by clicking on the render options here, or render settings. And the first thing you want to do before you set up your AO render, whether you're loading my scene or creating your own, is you have to make sure that you are going to render using Mental Ray. And the default is Maya software. So right here it says render using Maya software. If you use Maya software for an AO pass, it will not work. It needs Mental Ray. So you go down here and you select Mental Ray, and then all of a sudden we have an expanded set of features here for rendering options. I want to show you what to do if you go to render using and there's no Mental Ray selected. So let's just go ahead and set that up. I'm going to go to Window, Settings and Preferences, Plugin Manager, and I'm going to look for a plugin here on the left side called Maya2MR.mll, and currently it's set to load and auto load, and it's not going to let me disable it because I already have a Mental Ray pass going here. So let me close the program, and I'm going to start with a fresh scene so I can show you how to enable this or disable it. Okay, so I have a fresh scene here, and if I open up the render options or render settings, I'm going to go to the render using tab, and I'm going to pull down, and you can see here there is no Mental Ray. Okay, so if that happens to you, you don't need to worry. Mental Ray is there. You just need to enable it, and the way you do that is by going to the Window Settings and Preferences Plugin Manager, and you're looking for a plugin called Maya2MR.mll, and that is the Maya to Mental Ray plugin for Maya. Mental Ray is a third-party rendering program that is shipped with Maya, so it's definitely the way to go. You don't want to use the Maya renderer; it's not very good. So Maya2MR.mll, make sure that that's loaded and check to auto load. And then you can close this, and the next time you open up your render settings, under render using, you will have Mental Ray under the options, and that's what you want to select. So let's go ahead and open back up that scene. It is AO stage 03. I'm going to open it up. Don't save. Okay, and we're back in business here. I've got my render settings. I've got my little sphere here in my sound stage, my virtual sound stage. I'm going to create a layer for that sphere. And now we're going to go ahead and set up our first AO pass. So I'm going to select the camera. Once I have the camera selected, you can see here the camera name is Render Cam. I've already created that for you. I'll show you at the end of this how to create your own camera. And if you want to change the resolution, which is currently 720 by 405, all you need to do is go into the Render Settings dialog box. Make sure you have Mental Ray selected as your renderer. Under Common, if you scroll down, this is where you set up your resolution. So what I did was I first set up the resolution to just be I used one of their presets. I kind of like the HD 720. That's 1280 by 720. And then make sure that you click the box that says maintain height and width ratio. And if you do that, then you can just change this to whatever you want it to be. So I usually just cut it in half. So I'm going to go 720 by 405. And that's pretty good for preview rendering. So the other thing you want to do right out of the gate, probably, so you don't forget to do it, is change the quality. And I'm going to change the quality from draft to production. Production is kind of the highest grade rendering quality that you can have. So we have our resolution set in half, so it's 720 by 405, and we have the quality set to production. All right. Once we have that, now we're ready to go ahead and start performing a render. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to go to Edit, select all. That's going to select everything in our scene, and then we're going to go over here to the layer editor. So normally we've been using display layers, but notice here there's a couple other tabs to the right of display, and the first one is render, and the second one is anim for animation. We want to use a render layer this time. So now that we have everything selected in our scene, we're going to go ahead and click this little icon, which is going to create a new layer and assign all the selected objects to that layer. And when we do that, it's going to create a render layer. So now we have all the objects that have been selected assigned to a render layer that then we can control through this dialog box here. So I'm just going to rename this now to AO Scene Pass underscore RL for render layer. And then I'm going to right click on that layer and I'm going to say attributes. And then what happens is it's going to pull up the attributes for that render layer. And then I want to navigate to the AO Scene Pass render layer, which is the layer I just created and named. And then I want to click on presets, and under presets I want to use occlusion as my preset type. So I open up the attributes. I'm going to navigate to AO Scene Pass RL, that's the render layer I just created, and then I'm going to go to presets and I want to select occlusion as my preset. Now when I do that, what happens here is it creates a surface shader, and you can see that everything in the interface went black. And that's because now this surface shader has been assigned to all the objects in the scene. And then piped into that surface shader, there is a node called MIB AMB Occlusion 4. Alright, and this is your ambient occlusion shader, which basically controls the properties for your render. Alright, so what we want to do here is we want to just go ahead and render this. So I'm going to render out the scene by clicking on the little render view button here. And what happens here is the render view comes up and it renders, but the whole thing is black. So there's a reason for that, and basically it is you have to adjust the max distance. So by default, the max distance on your MIB AMB Occlusion 4, or yours will be named a little bit different, it'll just be MIB Ambient Occlusion. Your shader here by default has a max distance of 0. So the first thing you want to do is just set that value to something low. You can just start at 1, and then we're going to go ahead and render it again. And there we go, now we can see something. So now that we have a baseline, we know that the material is on there and it's rendering. Now we have to just go ahead and tweak the properties. Now before we do that, I just want to show you a little bit about the render view box here. So we have the render view dialog. This little button right here will render the entire frame. That takes a little longer. If you marquee drag anywhere inside that frame, it draws this little red box. And then if you hit this little button here with the red box around it, it will just render that region, which is a lot faster for tweaking things. These you don't have to worry about. This little button is kind of nice. This will basically take whatever frame that you just rendered and it'll store it in a buffer, and then it'll keep them side by side here. So if I go ahead and just change my my view here a little bit and I do another render, all I have to do is click on that button there, and now it banks both images so that I can click between them. And this is very helpful when you start tweaking the properties so that you can see the subtle differences between the settings that you're changing. So let's go ahead and now talk about some of the properties for this scene. So I'm going to select my little sphere here, just hit the F key to frame it up. And let's go ahead and start tweaking the settings of our shader here. Now, we had said that you had the MIB ambient occlusion shader on all these objects, and now that I've clicked into my scene, I've actually lost that over here in my attribute editor. Well, it's easy enough to get back to. If you ever want it, every single material in here in the scene has that material on it, so all you have to do is select any object, right click, say material attributes, and then it'll pull up the surface shader. And then once you have the surface shader pulled up, all you have to do is click the input connections or the upstream connections, and you'll get to the MIB ambient occlusion shader. Alright, so now let's we have the max distance set to 1. Let's go ahead and tweak this image. So right now our sphere is completely blown out and we want to be able to see the edges. So the way we're going to do that is by adjusting the max distance. So I started with a low value, and what that does is it's basically going to blow out everything in the scene. It's going to make everything really hot. As I increase the distance, things are going to become less hot. So I'm going to go ahead and up that to like 15 and render it again. And you can see here that we're getting better definition now. The top of this is still really blown out, so that means that I have to increase my max distance. So I'm going to change it to something, say 30, and then I'm going to render it again. Okay, so now we can see, I don't know if you'll be able to see this with your compression, but we can see the entire sphere and its boundary. But that's still a little washed out for my taste. So I know that the dimensions of my soundstage that I built are 50 units. So I'm just going to go ahead and go higher and go to something like 40, and I'm going to go ahead and render that out again. Okay, so 40 wasn't bad. I'm going to go ahead and bank that image by clicking on the Save Keep Image here button. And then I'm going to go ahead and just go a little higher. I'm going to try 50, since I know that's the extent of my scene. So I'm going to go ahead and do 50 for max distance, and I'm going to go ahead and render again. Okay, so 50, that looks a little bit better. I'm going to split the difference now and just do 45, and that's probably going to be pretty good for me. Alright, the next thing we want to look at is the spread here. You really don't want to change this value much. Basically, anything from 0.8 to 0.9 will be sufficient. I've found that a value of 0.8 is sufficient for pretty much anything, so I'm just going to leave that alone. If you do want to try tweaking this to see if you get a little bit different look, really I would not go above 1 ever and stay between 0.8 and 1. But generally you don't need to change that. We also have a setting here called fall off, and what fall off is going to do is it's going to make our image either hotter or less hot. So right now with the default of 1, the image is less hot. If I go ahead and back this down to say a 0.5 and I render it again, my hot spots for my objects are going to be accentuated. So you can see here the top of this sphere got a lot hotter than it was previously. So you can keep going down with that 0.25 we'll take it down. We'll try to blow the top off of this thing so you can't really see it. So basically here I took it down, the fall off, to a 0.25, and you can see that we can't even see the silhouette of this sphere with respect to our background. That's what you don't want. Alright, so if you want to play with the fall off, you like a hotter look, that's fine, knock yourself out, but make sure that you choose a setting that basically will still maintain the silhouette with respect to the background. So I actually like it to be a little bit fuller look, so I just leave it at 1. And then I would go into Photoshop and color correct to get the subtle exposure that I wanted, rather than doing it in Maya in camera. So I'll just go ahead and render that out. Okay, so that looks pretty good. I just need to show you a few more settings. Alright, so now, I don't know if you can really see this with the compression from the capture, but we have these kind of rough, striated lines going through this image. And the reason for that is because our samples are currently set to 16, which is kind of the lowest. Alright, the lowest setting you can possibly have. So, well, not possibly, but the lowest setting you would want to have. So let me just keep this image, and I'm going to just up this value to 32. So I'm just going to go in powers of 2, up the chain to kind of illustrate the difference in the sample setting. So the first one that I just did was 16. Now I'm doing one here at 32. And I'm rendering it again, and whether or not you can see this or not, you might have to do it for yourself to truly be able to see it. But now all this kind of artifacting that was happening in my image has disappeared, and I now have a nice smooth render. Okay, so that looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and keep that one. And I just am trying to go through here, so I'm going to go to 64 now, and I'm going to render it again. And what I'm trying to do is find the optimal setting for my scene for this render. So you're going to have to experiment, and it's going to change from camera angle to camera angle and depending what's in the frame. But you're going to have to increase the quality by using the samples, and you're just going to kind of have to figure out what is the optimal setting. So as you increase the samples, your render time will increase, and as you decrease the samples, your render time will decrease. But so will your quality. So quality goes up, time goes up, or quality goes down and time goes down. So I'm going to go ahead and buffer that frame, and then I'm going to go to 128. 64 looks pretty good for this scene and this shot. I'll take it to 128 just so I can compare all three or all four. Okay, and so we have the last one, which is 128. I'm going to go ahead and grab that. And now I'm just going to scroll through all of them. So there we have 16. There we have 32. Gets a little better. There's still some artifacts. 64, very few artifacts. And then 128, pretty much 0 artifacts. So basically you probably want to use something around 64 or 128 for your sample setting. I like 64 because it's kind of the optimal setting. It looks pretty good, but it's not so expensive that you're going to be sitting there waiting for hours for your render. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that right there at 64. The next thing I want to show you here is the bright and the dark. And what that is basically similar to a Photoshop duotone, where you kind of like can sepia tone an image. So what the bright is it's basically your white point. So if I click on that, I can adjust my white point. So I'm going to do something really dramatic just to illustrate this. So I'm going to go into the green spectrum here, maybe greenish blue, and I'm going to try to kind of create a matrix type look for the scene here. So I'm going to change my white point to this green color. I'm going to change my dark point to also a greenish black. Okay. And then I'm going to go ahead and re-render this. And you can see here, I just wanted to illustrate that the white and the black point can be changed to kind of whatever you want. So obviously you wouldn't do something this dramatic unless you were trying to achieve kind of an artistic look. Typically what you want to do is you may want to change the bright point to something white. Alright, we're going to go with hospital white to begin with. But maybe I just want to add a little bit of red in there, right? So I might select, and maybe not that pink, I want it to be a little bit more brownish orange. Okay, so there we go. Very, very subtle, alright? Maybe not even subtle enough. I'm going to go a little bit. Maybe I just don't like that total hospital white. And the other thing I want to do is I'm going to change my dark point. So I'm going to go ahead and zero it out to black. And then I'm going to go back in there and I'm going to just use something again with a little bit of a red tint, and I'm going to go ahead and re-render this. And so what we see here is that the image looks kind of white, and depending on the monitor that you're on and the color settings, it may look whiter on some than others. But what you've done here is you've just given your image just a subtle color tint so that it isn't just that jarring kind of hospital white that sometimes you see out of an AO render. Okay, so let's say that you do like the hospital white, so I'm going to go ahead and take that back. So I zeroed out the white. I'm going to go ahead and zero out the black. What I want to show you is I'm going to go ahead and re-render this. Okay, so I've rendered this out with the hospital white. Notice here my shadow areas, and that's very, very black. We kind of call that the dark side of the moon, and that's because on the dark side of the moon there's basically no tone whatsoever. It's just completely pitch black, and that's because there's no light source out in space that is actually illuminating that side of the moon. So dark side of the moon here is not always good. So what you may want to do here is if you don't have any detail, if it's just completely black there, you can't do any sort of color correction. So what I always like to do is I like to come in here and I'm going to change my color to RGB, and I just like to do like a 30. Instead of completely black 0 0 0, I like to do a 30 30 30. And what that's going to do is it's just going to give me a little bit of color down in my black tones that then I would be able to go into Photoshop and I could either expose that higher or darker depending. I could get right back to that 0 0 0 in a Photoshop color correction, but if I didn't start here I wouldn't be able to. Alright, so that's worth pointing out. So I like to just give this about a 30 30 30. That to me looks much nicer. We can see the bottom of this, and if you wanted to color correct it later in Photoshop you could do that. Alright, so now we have our settings defined here for our AO render. Now what we want to do is we want to render something for real. So let's go ahead and grab a. So I'm going to grab my Bronco concept that I've been modeling for lectures with you guys. I'm going to go ahead and open that scene. I'm going to open up the Bronco concept scene, the unclean version. Alright. So basically this scene has all my NURBS curves and all my reference planes and basically all the junk in the scene that we don't really need. Alright, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to hide these reference planes. And so that I just have my geometry for my model in the scene. And then I'm going to go ahead and open the outliner. And we're just going to see here that we have all this junk. Look at all these nodes with all this stuff on it. We got curves, we got transforms, we got all the stuff that we don't really need, right? So I'm going to show you a quick way to get rid of all that stuff. Alright, so I'm going to just set this over here, and I'm going to go up here into my pick masks, and I'm going to drop this little box down, and I'm going to say all objects off. Alright, so that means if I select out here in the interface, I'm not going to select anything. Alright, and then I want to right click on the Surfaces tab, which is right here on the pick mask, and I want to say Poly Surfaces. So if I know that I built this model and it's only out of polygon surfaces, now I know that with the pick mask selected that all I'm going to pick is polygons. If I select in the interface here, you can see here that all my poly objects light up, and then if I go over here to the outliner, you can see that none of this other junk has been selected. Alright, so basically what I've just done is I've selected my polygon geometry only, and I've left all the other stuff behind. Alright, so now that I have all my poly objects selected, I want to go ahead and go to File, Export Selection as my option. I'm going to open up that dialog box. I want the file type to be Maya binary, and then under Include these inputs, I'm going to turn off everything. So turn off history, turn off channels, turn off expressions, turn off constraints, and only want to include texture info. So then I'm going to click the box that says Export Selection. It's going to ask me what I want to name the file. So I'm going to call it Bronco Concept Render. So that's how I know that this file's been cleaned up for a render. And I'm going to go ahead and save it. Replace it, yes, because I've already created one. Alright, now that I have that, I'm going to go ahead and open my scene, my AO Stage 3. And I'm going to go to File, Import, and I want to go ahead and import that Bronco Concept Render into this scene. So I'm going to do that. And there's sometimes this thing would not come in. Today it decided to come in. If it doesn't come in, you can just import the AO render stage into your car scene. So one of the other things I wanted to do before I imported this was I forgot to check the box that said group the objects. So let me go ahead and do this again. So I'm going to go File, Open Scene. I'm going to open up the AO stage, and I want to do this one more time. This time I want to select a box that says group the objects. Alright, so I'm going to say File, Import, Bronco Concept Render. I did it again. Alright, let's try this one more time. Open Scene, AO Stage 3. Okay. I want to go to File, Import. I want to open the dialog box, and I forgot to click this little box here that says Group. Alright. So, Import Options, Group, and then I'm going to say Import. And now, if I select one of these and I just start hitting the up arrow, eventually it'll get to the top of my group chain. And what I wanted to do, the reason I wanted to group this object was because I wanted to scale it down. So right now I've selected the group, I've hit insert for the pivot. I want to move the pivot of my Jeep or my Bronco here down to be the floor. I'm going to hit insert again, and now I want to scale this Bronco down to fit my scene. Alright, so I've done that. I'm going to go ahead and hit the F key to frame my selection. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that little sphere there. And now we're ready to go ahead and put a AO render to this scene. So we're going to do it the same way we did it previously, where I'm going to say File, Select All, or I'm sorry, Edit, Select All. So Edit, Select All. That's going to select all the objects in my scene, and then I'm going to go over here to the render layers, and I'm going to create a new render layer by clicking this button here, which will assign all the selected objects to the layer. I'm going to then rename this AO Scene Pass underscore RL, and then I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to say Attributes, and it's going to open up the Attributes panel. I want to click on the AO Scene Pass render layer, which I just created, and then under Presets I'm going to right click, left click, and hold down, and say occlusion. Now my scene goes dark here again. If I go ahead and render this scene, we won't see anything. It'll just come up black. Okay. And now if I want to go ahead and start tweaking the parameters so that we can actually see something and get a decent AO pass out of this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the MIB ambient occlusion node, and I'm just going to change the max distance, and I'm always going to start with something low. This time let's start with 10, and let's go ahead and re-render that. And we can see here we have a bunch of junk here in the render, and hopefully that is just caused by either the samples being too low or the render quality being set too low. So let's go ahead and try a few things here to try to clean up these artifacts. Let's first go ahead and try to change the quality settings under our render. So I'm going to click on the render settings box here. And again, I want to go to quality under mental ray. And I want to change this from custom to production. And then let's go ahead and render that again and see what happens. Okay, so we still have some artifacts. So I'm going to go ahead and hit escape, my escape key, which will cancel the current render. And then I'm going to go ahead and change my samples to 32. And we're going to go ahead and render this out again. And we still have... Okay, so sorry about that. I figured out what happened. Basically, when I created my optimized scene for render with the Bronco, I accidentally had my originals folder unhidden, and so I had a bunch of duplicate geometry that was corrupting my scene. So I went back, I re-exported my Bronco without the originals layer showing, and everything is copacetic. So the other thing I want to do here is I want to select my car, and you always want to make sure that your tires are penetrating the floor just a little bit. And the reason for that is because if you don't do that, then your vehicle is always going to look like it's kind of floating off the ground, and it's just a really unnatural and a disconcerting look. So always make sure that your tires are kind of penetrating the floor a little bit. So we're going to go ahead and render this, and we're just going to go ahead and optimize these settings a little bit. So we'll go ahead and wait for this to render. I'm going to pause so you don't have to wait through it. Okay, so the vehicle rendered. It wasn't that long. It took about 30 seconds. I just thought I'd spare you having to wait through that. Alright, so rendered out, we have the wheels semi-intersecting the floor, and we just want to go ahead and tweak this a little bit. Right now my silhouette is completely blown out. My vehicle is kind of just washing right into the background. That's no good. So we want to fix that. So I'm just going to click on any of these pieces of geometry, and I'm going to right click and say material attributes. And I'm just going to go ahead and navigate to my ambient occlusion shader. And I'm going to change the samples to 32. And then I'm going to change the max distance to, let's say, like 45 like I did previously. And that should work because the scene size has not changed from the previous version where I was rendering the sphere out. So basically, if you keep your scene consistent, your scene size consistent, you really will not have to change your settings here. So I changed the max distance to 45, and already I'm getting a much better look. We can actually see the silhouette here of the vehicle versus the backdrop. I'm going to pause again to save you having to wait through the rest. Okay, so that looks pretty good. We can see the silhouette of the vehicle versus the backdrop. That exposure is not bad. The only other thing I might change is, again, to change my black point to something other than 0, 0, 0, 30, 30, 30, just so that we don't have this dark side of the moon kind of lighting effect. And I'm going to go ahead and re-render that to show you the difference. I'll pause so you don't have to wait through it. And there we go. We've got a nice render here, AO pass. We can see the silhouette of our vehicle against the backdrop. Everything looks to be exposed pretty well. So I'd say if you get it looking like that, you're pretty much in business. Okay, the only other thing I want to show you is how to save your images. So we've shown you how to temporarily buffer them to the frame here and scroll through them. But I want to show you how to permanently save an image. So now that I have something that I really like, all I need to do is go to File, right here under the Render view. I'm going to say File, Save Image, and then I can go ahead and save the image as whatever file type I want. I'm going to go ahead and either save it as a TIFF or a PNG will also work. So let's call this AO Scene Pass .png. Go ahead and save the image, and that's it. So that's all you're going to have to do when you finally tweak it and see something you like. You're just going to go ahead and go to File, Save Image, save it out to wherever you want. There it is right there, and do that to finish your project, and let's see some cool stuff. Alright, so good luck with everything, and I'm looking forward to seeing your final results.